بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلوات ربي وسلامه على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم اللهم اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي وبعد. So last week we discussed the merit of learning and teaching, and today we're going to look at some of the intellectual, logical proofs and examples of the virtue and the merit of knowledge bi-idhnillah, and hopefully we'll finish that this evening, and then we'll be on to the second chapter in the following lesson bi-idhnillah. So Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala wa rada an, he says, اعلم أن المطلوب من هذا الباب معرفة فضيلة العلم ونفاسته. So he starts by saying, know that the purpose of this section, i.e. what we're going to take here, is to know the merit of knowledge and its virtue, as we were previously looking at, but based upon logical proofs. So he's going to start linguistically. He says, وَالْفَضِيلَةُ مَأْخُوذَةٌ مِنَ الْفَضْلِ, that the Arabic term fadila, it's taken from fadl. So fadila is basically virtue. In Arabic it's taken from the word which means surplus, to have a surplus of something, to have an extra amount of something. He says, وَهِيَ الزِّيَادَةِ. So as I just mentioned, it is a ziyada, i.e. it means surplus, fadl, the word fadl. So for example, if you were studying a book in fiqh, you would say in the chapter of tahara, purification, fadlul wudu, that which has been left over, or that which is surplus in wudu. فإذا تشارك شيئان في أمر واختص أحدهما على الآخر بمزيد يقال فضله. So he says, if two things are related to a single matter, and one of those has something more in relation to that matter than the other, you would say فضله, that it has surplus to the other thing which is being compared to. So I'll give you an example shortly, inshallah. وَلَهُ الْفَضْلُ عَلَيْهِ مَهْمَا كَانَتْ زِيَادَتُهُ فِيمَا هُوَ كَمَالُ ذَلِكَ الشَّيْء, with a condition that which is surplus is something which makes it more virtuous in relation to that issue that they are both, or that quality, that subject that they both relate to. So as an example, you have two modes of transport. You have a car and you have, let's say, a motorbike. And you are looking at which of the two is a better mode of transport. And your consideration for this discussion is speed, the speed of transport, the amount of time it will take you to get from point A to point B. The motorbike, usually anyway, would have a surplus amount of speed in comparison to the car. Therefore, the motorbike in relation to transport is seen as more virtuous than the, not literally virtuous, perhaps you would say it has more merit than the car as a means of transport. But you could also look at it from a different perspective. You could say which of the two is more comfortable. So for example, the car has a roof, it has chairs, it has heating and so on and so forth. It protects you from the elements such as rain and wind. And so the car has more merit than the motorbike in relation to comfort for traveling. So he's saying that if something has more than something else in relation to a particular topic, then it's seen as having more merit than the other thing. Then he says, فَإِذَا فَهِمْتَ هَذَا لَمْ يَخْفَى عَلَيْكَ أَنَّ الْعِلْمَ فَضِيلَةٌ إِنْ أَخَذْتَهُ بِالْإِضَافَةِ إِلَى سَائِرِ الْأَوْصَافِ. He says, if you understand this, then it will be clear to you that knowledge has merit over other things in relation to other qualities of description or characteristics. وَالْعِلْمُ فَضِيلَةٌ فِي ذَاتِهِ, and knowledge is virtuous and it has merit over other things in and of itself. Why? وَعَلَى الْإِطْلَاقِ مِنْ غَيْرِ إِضَافَةٍ, without being attached to other things. So you don't need to say the knowledge of fiqh, the knowledge of hadith, the knowledge of something else, in order for knowledge to be seen as something of merit. If you just simply say knowledge, it's a merit, regardless what it relates to. Why? فإنه وصف كمال الله سبحانه وبه شرف الملائكة والأنبياء, because it is a description of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's perfection. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one of the qualities of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's perfection, the qualities which relate to the perfection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is ilm, knowledge. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-alim. So knowledge it relates to the perfection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has knowledge of all things. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has knowledge of that which was, that which is, that which will be, that which isn't, but He knows how it would be if it was. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's knowledge is all encompassing. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's knowledge is not something that we can comprehend. And this is a point of discussion where people often fall into problems, trying to comprehend Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or trying to comprehend Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's knowledge. An example of such, qadr, trying to understand the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, trying to comprehend the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is an area where people always fall into problems when they go into it with too much depth. And Al-Muzani, rahimahullah, one of the famous students of Imam al-Shafi'i, he said, Qadrullahi ta'ala sirruhu, that the qadr, the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is His secret. No one is going to be able to understand it. You have to, and there are areas in Islam where you have to simply believe. You have to say, amantu, aslamtu, as Ibrahim alayhi salam gave us the example of in his character and his behavior. There are moments where you have to say, I believe in what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has informed us. I believe in what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows, even if I don't understand or comprehend it. That's a test of Iman. Then he says, al-Ghazali rahimahullah, wa'alam, that the knowledge is also one of the ways in which the angels and the prophets are more virtuous and more honorable than others. The difference between a prophet and those who are not prophets ultimately is knowledge. And of course, knowledge in the form of revelation. That which has been revealed directly to the heart. That which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has allowed the Prophet to comprehend and see and to experience, which others cannot due to a lack of prophecy. Likewise, the angels. The angels have knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we do not yet have because of their interactions with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so on and so forth. And because of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has allowed them to know and understand. So knowledge is a meritorious thing in and of itself. If you say knowledge, it's something of virtue. And in reflecting upon that, we have to remind ourselves, what's the difference between us and the other creatures from the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Knowledge. The other creatures may have a form of knowledge, and in today's society, we are often reduced to animals. They like to reduce us to a form of animal, a type of animal, but that's far from the truth. Animals cannot articulate themselves like we do. Animals cannot conceptualize things like we do. Animals cannot describe, and they cannot build, and they cannot reflect, and they cannot carry out the tasks that we do. And that which differentiates between us and animals is what? Knowledge. When we leave off knowledge, we become similar to animals. And that's the importance of knowledge. And as we were saying previously, we are a nation of knowledge. We are an ummah of ilm. That is our heritage. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, al-hikmatu dalatul mu'min, that wisdom is the lost property of a believer. Wherever a believer finds wisdom, it belongs to him. It was his lost property, now he's found it, been reunited with it. And if we turn back to knowledge, then our situation will change. But what does that mean, knowledge? Knowledge meaning understanding and application, which we're going to come to see inshallah. Then he says, وَعْلَمْ أَنَّ شَيْءَ النَّفِيسَ الْمَرْغُوبَ فِي يَنْقَسِمُ إِلَى, he says, know, if you know this, the virtue, the merit of knowledge, then know that knowledge which is desired by people is categorized into, he's going to give us three things, three categories. The first one, مَا يُطْلَبُ لِغَيْرِهِ, that which is sought out for other than itself. So knowledge which is sought out for other than itself. What does he mean? We're going to see inshallah shortly. وَإِلَى مَا يُطْلَبُ لِذَاتِهِ, and that which is sought out for itself, in of itself. We're again going to see an example of that. And the third category, وَإِلَى مَا يُطْلَبُ لِغَيْرِهِ وَلِذَاتِهِ جَمِيعًا, that which is sought out for itself and for other than itself. So now he's going to give us examples. The first one, al-matlubu lighayrihi, so that which is sought out for other than itself. Ad-darahimu wad-dananir, basically tangible wealth, money, that which you use to barter with. So he gives the example of the dirham and the dinar, and they are still used in some places by name, but of course they're not the same as they used to be previously. He says, فَإِنَّهُمَا حَجَرَانِ لَا مَنْفَعَةَ لَهُمَا وَلَوْلَا أَنَّ اللَّهَ سُبْحَانَهُ وَتَعَالَى يَسَّرَ قَضَاءَ الْحَاجَاتِ بِهِمَا لَكَانَ وَالْحَصْبَاءَ بِمَثَابَةٍ وَاحِدَةٍ. He says that in reality, the dirham and the dinar are simply rocks. They're just basically rocks that have no benefit. If I were to give you now a physical piece of, a lump of gold, the highest quality gold that you can possibly acquire, the highest standard of gold, how can you benefit yourself with it? If it weren't for the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made it a means of transaction, agreed upon by mankind. It's perhaps one of the only things that we have agreed upon as mankind. Wherever you go, you present them with a lump of gold, they'll see it as valuable. So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't place that value in gold and silver, they would be similar to the rest of the rocks that you find on the ground. Nothing. No one would seek out gold or silver. People die for gold and silver today, and have done throughout history. They die for gold and silver. And today perhaps we're in even a worse situation than gold and silver. We're using paper, and perhaps soon digital only forms of bartering and trading. Paper money used to be attached to gold. Then it became attached to oil. Now it's attached to nothing, lies. Now paper money is attached to lies, attached to predictions, and so on and so forth. So really, a person is chasing after absolutely nothing. At least with physical gold, you can carry it around, you can see it. The glistening perhaps brings some delight to your soul. But paper money, nothing. If the economy collapses, that money is going to be worth absolutely nothing. Whereas gold and silver, if the economy collapses, they still hold their value. So we're in a worse situation than we are today with our paper money, and we should reflect upon the fact that we are chasing after that which is worth absolutely nothing. We're chasing after something, and we're dying for, and we're killing others for something which is worth absolutely nothing, i.e. paper money. Then he says, وَالَّذِي يُطْلَبُ لِذَاتِهِ, that which is sought for itself, فَالسَّعَادَةُ فِي الْآخِرَةِ وَلَذَّةُ النَّظْرِ لِوَجْهِ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى. Happiness in the akhirah, blissfulness in the akhirah, and knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's, he's saying, that is what is sought out for itself. And if you think about it, if you think about all of our actions, they should be for that purpose. They should be for the sake of pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They should be for the sake of attaining eternal pleasure and happiness. And if you just reflect on that issue of happiness, if you ask most people today, why is it that they're seeking money? Why is it that they're seeking whatever it is that they're seeking, status, fame? Why is it that they're wearing the freshest of clothing? Why is it that they want the nicest of cars, the best of houses, the most beautiful of spouses, and so on and so forth? Why? Because they think those things will make them happy, but they won't. And that's one of the problems of our time, that we're seeking happiness in the wrong place, and we are let down over and over again. That's why you find these individuals who are at first deemed successful, and then they're deemed to be a tragedy story, but they reach and they attain the success that they're told will lead to their happiness, i.e. they become famous, they become wealthy, they become rich, they become this and that, and then they are suffering with depression, with drug problems, with alcohol problems, with relationship problems. Many of them even commit suicide. Why? Because they've reached that place that they assumed would fill the hole in their heart that they've had, and the hole has not been filled. They therefore realize there's nothing else that they can attain in this life, because they're looking in the wrong place. Whereas you go to places and you see people that don't have anything, but they have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and they're happy. That's where true happiness comes, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Through Allah we can attain happiness. Through Allah we can attain confidence. Today people are suffering anxiety, depression, what is deemed as low self-esteem, although that is problematic in of itself. Should the believer be someone who has high self-esteem, i.e. thinks highly of his or herself? That's a question to be asked. But these problems, why do we have these problems? Anxiety and depression and so on and so forth. Because we have made society our judge. We care about what society thinks of us. Whereas for the believer, his or her only concern is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whether or not society is pleased with them, as long as Allah is pleased with them, they feel confident and happy. And so they gain their happiness and their confidence through their relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And today, if you look at the multiple forms of therapy available for dealing with the various mental health issues and diagnoses that we have today, you'll find so many interventions that try to focus on the symptoms, because they themselves don't understand the cause. They don't understand the cause because they don't recognize the issue which the cause is related to, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So for us, we have that framework, and it's important that we make that framework our framework of trying to attain pleasure, trying to attain, or I should say happiness, trying to attain confidence, trying to attain whatever else it may be that we want. We should make Islam and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His pleasure, our framework and our mode of trying to attain whatever it is that we're trying to attain. So he says, al-matlub li ghayrihi, that which is sought out for other than itself. As an example, gold and silver, worth nothing, just rocks, but Allah has placed value in them, so we seek them out. The second is that which is sought for itself, i.e. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, seeking Allah's pleasure. You're not going to get anything from Allah's pleasure except Allah's pleasure. And thirdly, he says, الذي يطلب لذاته ولغيره فكسلامة البدن فإن سلامة الرجل مثلا مطلوبة من حيث إنها سلامة للبدن عن الألم ومطلوبة للمشي بها والتوصل إلى المآرب والحاجات. He says an example of that which is sought out in and of itself and for other than itself is a healthy body. Why? A healthy body is sought because if you have a healthy body, you won't have pains in your body. You won't have problems with your body. Even if you're not doing anything with your body, you won't suffer the consequences of having an unhealthy body. So therefore, people seek out a healthy body. But it's also sought out. Why? Because with a healthy body, you can attend to your affairs and you can carry out that which you would like to carry out. So a healthy body is sought out for itself and for other than itself. Today, why is it that so many of us are unhealthy? Because we use our bodies for the wrong purposes. Our sole purpose has become entertainment and pleasure. That's not our purpose in this life. We're not here for entertainment and for pleasure. We're here to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not to please ourselves. And because we've made the pleasure of ourselves that which we run after, our body suffers. Because in pleasing the self, the body is going to suffer, because the body our sense of pleasure will never be fulfilled. As the Prophet ﷺ, he said, the only thing that will fill the mouth of the son of Adam, the only thing that will give him fulfillment is the turab, the dust or the earth when he is placed in the grave. And there's a wisdom behind that we should understand and that we can see in society today. Once you open that door of seeking pleasure of the body, that becomes your goal, there are many, many, many doors behind it. Because we are easily amused, but we are easily bored. And so you'll find that a person who, it's like a drug user, for example. At first, a small amount might stimulate him and do the job. But slowly he needs to increase in the amount of drugs that he consumes in order to get high. Likewise with our desires. In Arabic, they give the example, a person who tries to quench his desires, he tries to seek pleasure in the dunya, is like someone drinking seawater. What happens to a person who drinks seawater? Before they quench their thirst, they die of dehydration and over drinking. Why? Because the salty water makes them even more thirsty. Therefore they drink more until they've consumed too much water for their body, and they'll die, or they become dehydrated because of the salt contained within the seawater. Likewise, a person who tries to seek or to fulfill himself with this dunya, he will kill himself before he actually attains that which he's seeking, i.e. pleasure. It's not possible. That's why you see people are becoming more and more and more perverted in that which they seek, because they are becoming more and more desensitized to that which would usually be sought. And that's why for us we have fasting, to learn to say no. The person who always says yes will destroy himself. The person who learns to say no will be satisfied with a small amount. And it should be a practice of ours. Because we're living in a society where we're encouraged to say yes all the time through advertisements. We don't realize the impact that advertisements have on us, on our mental states, our emotional and our spiritual states. The billboards and the adverts, etc. They encourage us to say yes all the time. We should learn to say no. Look at the statement of Umar ibn al-Khattab radhiyallahu anhu. He said about the Arabs and of course the believers. He said, we are a people who don't eat unless we are hungry. And if we eat, we don't fill our stomachs. We only eat for the necessity, and when we do eat, we don't fill our stomachs. Us, we eat for the pleasure of eating. We eat for the pleasure of eating, and we fill our stomachs because we enjoy it. And that's why we have so many sicknesses in our community, in our society. And that's only with food. Look at the desires of the private parts. Look at the perversion that's taking place in our society because of the private parts and chasing after the private parts. Look at the self. Look at what people are doing in seeking some sort of pleasure through the self, i.e. what has equated to today as worshipping the self online and social media and so on and so forth. It's all because we've departed away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the framework that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. And we're thinking that we're going to attain happiness through those things. No. Through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is our happiness, and that's the only way. Then he says, وبهذا الاعتبار إذا نظرت إلى العلم رأيته لذيذا في نفسه. So if you consider these three things, that which is sought for other than itself, that which is sought for itself, and that which is sought for itself and other than itself, he says, you will realize that knowledge is sweet and delightful in and of itself. You enjoy seeking knowledge. And I mean any type of knowledge, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed within us an inquisitiveness. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed an inquisitive nature within us. When you see children enjoy learning. Children enjoy it because they haven't been corrupted by society or by cultures that promote a lack of education, educational cultures, etc. But we have the blessing of when we read and when we seek knowledge, we can turn it into an ibadah if we have ikhlas, sincerity. A person can sit up all night reading a book because they enjoy that book. If they simply make their intention for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's sake, they can attain some sort of reward for that. The blessing that we have. He says, فَيَكُونُ مَطْلُوبًا لِذَاتِهِ. So it becomes sought out for itself alone. Someone seeks out knowledge because they love knowledge. There are people that have multiple PhDs, multiple master's degrees, because they love the educational process. They love learning. وَوَجَدْتَهُ وَسِيلَةً إِلَى دَارِ الْآخِرَةِ وَسَعَادَتِهَا. And you will also find, if you reflect over knowledge, that it's a means of attaining happiness in the akhirah and the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَذَرِيعَةً إِلَى الْقُرْبِ مِنَ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى. And it is a means of gaining closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَلَا يُتَوَصَّلُ إِلَيْهِ إِلَّا بِهِ. And reality is that you cannot attain a place with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala except through knowledge. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, مَا تَقَرَّبَ إِلَيَّ عَبْدِي بِشَيْءٍ أَحَبَّ إِلَيَّ مِمَّا افْتَرَضْتُهُ عَلَيْهِ. أو كما قال النبي عليه الصلاة والسلام in the hadith Qudsi. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, according to the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام's statement, that there is nothing more beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made compulsory for that servant. What's the point in mentioning that hadith? That through knowledge we can understand what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made compulsory, and then we can start to acquire a close place to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا زَالَ يَتَقَرَّبُ إِلَيَّ حَتَّى أُحِبَّ. That the slave does not, the slave continues to get closer to me through the voluntary acts after establishing the compulsory acts until I love him. Until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves that servant. How is it that we know what the compulsory acts are and what the voluntary acts are? By studying them, by seeking knowledge. He says, وَأَعْظَمُ الْأَشْيَاءِ رُتْبَةً فِي حَقِّ الْآدَمِ السَّعَادَةُ الْأَبَدِيَّةِ. And the greatest of merits for mankind is eternal happiness, eternal bliss. And again, if you just reflect over what people are seeking today, the reality is they're seeking happiness. They want to be constantly happy. But in this dunya, it's not possible. That's why they go from one thing to another, trying to maintain a state of happiness. And anything which interrupts what they perceive to be a state of happiness becomes problematic for them. But we can't be happy consistently in this dunya. We can't be happy because it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made our happiness in the akhirah. This place is a place of sowing the seeds. And for this reason, seeking happiness in the wrong places, we're falling into the problems that we see today. And so we have to understand this as believers. We have to understand this and not be fooled by society around us. We should be the ones teaching them, telling them, you're seeking happiness in the wrong place. If not through our statements, at the very least through our actions. When they see us, they should see a people that are happy, content, even if we have a little, because we know that our akhirah is waiting for us. They shouldn't see us overly consuming or overly worried about attaining this dunya, unless it's for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of course. Attaining this dunya to use for the sake of pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And of course that's a different discussion which we'll come to inshallah in the next section. He says, وَلَا يُتَوَصَّلُ وَلَا يُتَوَصَّلُ إِلَى الْعَمَلِ إِلَّا بِالْعِلْمِ بِكَيْفِيَةِ الْعَمَلِ. And a person cannot start to apply Islam except by acquiring knowledge of how to apply Islam, which we just discussed. فَأَصْلُ السَّعَادَةِ فِي الدُّنْيَا وَالْآخِرَةِ هُوَ الْعِلْمِ. And so you find that the origin of all happiness in the dunya and the akhirah is what? Knowledge. فَهُوَ إِذَنْ أَفْضَلُ الْأَعْمَالِ. Therefore, we can come to the conclusion that knowledge is the best of all actions. The best of all actions a person can engage in is any type of action which relates to knowledge. And of course, he's speaking about for the believer, the one that has a good intention, the one that wants to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, هذه فضيلة العلم مطلقة, that this is the virtue and the merit of knowledge in a general sense. ثم تختلف العلوم وتتفاوت فضائلها بتفاوتها. And then of course, knowledge differs, and the stations and the virtue, the merit of the various types of knowledge differ in accordance to that which is the most important, and so on and so forth. And again, this can change from one person to another. For one person, it may be compulsory upon him to seek a certain type of knowledge. So when he seeks that type of knowledge, that's the best type of knowledge he can seek for him. Whereas another person, something else may be compulsory upon him due to the circumstance he finds himself in. He says, وَأَمَّا فَضِيلَةُ التَّعْلِيمِ وَالتَّعَلُّمْ فَظَاهِرَةٌ مِمَّا ذَكَرْنَاهُ. As for the virtue and the merit of teaching and learning, it's apparent from that which we've mentioned. فإن العلم إذا كان أفضل الأمور كان تعلمه طلبا للأفضل وكان تعليمه إفادة للأفضل. He says if knowledge is the best of actions, then acquiring knowledge is seeking out that which is the best, and teaching knowledge is giving out that which is the best. So we can see the importance of knowledge and the virtue of knowledge, and we should make it a part of our lives that we are always engaged in some form of learning or teaching. Then he says, الباب الثاني في العلم المحمود والمذموم. He goes on now to the section that I assumed we were going to take next week, but قدر الله, we've taken this section quite quickly, so we'll move on inshallah. He says, في العلم المحمود والمذموم, knowledge which is praiseworthy and knowledge which is detestable. And now a person may ask, is it possible to have knowledge which is praiseworthy and detestable? Didn't we just say all types of knowledge are praiseworthy? Yes, but according to the circumstance, according to a person's interaction with knowledge, it can be detestable. And of course, there are things which are detestable in and of themselves, so knowledge of those things becomes detestable, as the knowledge takes the ruling of that which it is about. He says, وَفِيهِ بَيَانُ مَا هُوَ فَرْضُ عَيْنٍ وَمَا هُوَ فَرْضُ كِفَايَةٍ وَتَفْضِيلُ عِلْمِ الْآخِرَةِ. We're going to look at that which is compulsory upon the individual of knowledge and that which is compulsory upon the collective. And this is very, very, very important for someone to understand. What type of knowledge is compulsory upon me to learn? And we mentioned previously that studying is not something which is praiseworthy because it's a voluntary act. It's praiseworthy, yes, but it is something which is compulsory. A person should not give themselves the excuse of ignorance. Seeking knowledge, trying to understand is compulsory, especially if we have classes available to us. If we have that which is accessible to us, it's compulsory. He says, اختلف الناس في العلم الذي هو فرض عين على كل مسلم. So he starts off by saying that there is a difference of opinion. He says, اختلف الناس. The people have disagreed about the knowledge which is فرض عين على كل مسلم, about the knowledge which is compulsory upon every single individual Muslim. When he says an-nas, what type of nas is he talking about? People. Who does he mean when he says people? Who does he mean? Scholars. He's talking about the scholars here. He doesn't mean that the ordinary people or the average people. He's saying an-nas, i.e. in reference to ilm, the people of ilm, ahlul ilm. فتفرقوا فيه أكثر من 20 فرقة أو 20 فرقة, and they basically divided into more than 20 different groups in relation to their opinion about knowledge which is compulsory upon every single person. He says ولا نطيل بنقل التفصيل ولكن حاصله أن كل فريق نزل الوجوب على العلم الذي هو بصدده. He says we're not going to elongate this discussion, we're going to simply summarize it, and to summarize it in short, every single group basically made that which relates to their subject the compulsory knowledge upon every single Muslim. So he says, for example, he's going to discuss the mutakallimun, the fuqaha. He says, فقال المتكلمون هو علم الكلام وقال الفقهاء هو علم الفقه وقال المفسرون والمحدثون هو علم الكتاب والسنة. So the mutakallimun, who are the mutakallimun? Those that are knowledgeable, the scholars of ilm al-kalam basically being the theology of Islam in brief. They said that it is Islamic theology. وقال الفقهاء هو علم الفقه. The fuqaha said it's fiqh. And the scholars of tafsir and hadith, they said it's the knowledge of the Quran and knowledge of hadith, knowledge of sunnah. And a person might say, but that sounds correct. Ilm al-Quran, ilm al-Sunnah. What's better? If a person doesn't understand how to interpret the Quran or the Sunnah, they don't understand how to interact with the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, it can be destructive. They can cause problems. And fiqh, of course, is something which allows you to interact. Usul al-fiqh allows you to interact. Ilm al-kalam allows you to interact, etc. An example of that, if you have, let's say, a university level curriculum, and you have a primary school level curriculum, which of the two is better? Which of the two is better? Generally speaking, the university level curriculum, right? If you say I've mastered this curriculum and it's a university level curriculum, people say, wow, that's great. But if you say I've mastered primary level curriculum, no one's going to be impressed as an adult. But if you take that university level curriculum now and you try to teach it to a child, it's very problematic. And so even though in of itself, the university level curriculum is praiseworthy, it's beneficial, if you try to teach it to a child, it becomes very problematic and confusing and disruptive. He says, وَالَّذِي يَنْبَغِي أَنْ يَقْطَعَ بِهِ الْمُحَصِّلِ وَلَا يَسْتَرِيبَ فِيهِ مَا سَنَذْكُرُ. So that which the person who's trying to understand this issue, which knowledge is compulsory upon the individual, that which he should know is definitely the case, and he should have no doubt about, is هو أن العلم ينقسم إلى علم معاملة وعلم مكاشفة وليس المراد بهذا العلم إلا علم المعاملة. He says that knowledge is categorized into knowledge of interaction, knowledge of practical application, and knowledge of unveiling. And this is something which relates more to the schools of tasawwuf and suluk, ilm mukashafa, and it's something which has been disputed about and so on and so forth, but we're not going to go into that now, as it's not the purpose of this part of the text. He says, وَلَيْسَ الْمَرَادُ بِهَذَا الْعِلْمِ إِلَّا عِلْمِ الْمُعَامَلَةِ. And we are not discussing here, i.e. in regards to what type of knowledge is compulsory upon the individual, we're not discussing anything other than that which relates to the practical application. So ilm al-mukashafa is out of the discussion. He says, وَالْمُعَامَلَةُ الَّتِي كُلِّفَ الْعَبْدُ الْعَاقِلُ الْبَالِغُ الْعِلْمُ بِهَا ثَلَاثَةً. That which a person who is baligh and aqil, so the person who is deemed responsible in Islam, i.e. he has reached an age of puberty or she has reached an age of puberty, and they are sane, and they have a sound intellectual capacity. It's three categories of knowledge: i'tiqad, wa fi'l, wa tark. So that which relates to iman, belief, that which relates to application, fi'l, and that which relates to tark, abstaining. So commandments and prohibitions. فإذا بلغ الرجل العاقل ضحوة فأول واجب عليه تعلم كلمتي الشهادة وفهم معناهما. So now he's going to give an example which will clarify what type of knowledge is compulsory upon the individual. He says, if a person reaches puberty in the morning, between Fajr and Dhuhr, if he reaches puberty at that time, the first thing which is compulsory upon him to learn, if he hasn't already understood and learnt, is the Shahadatain and what they mean. And this is something which relates to an issue which is differed upon by the schools of Islamic theology. And again, we're not going to go into those differences unless they are relevant to the topic. And this is the work of Imam al-Ghazali, so we will read the work as Imam al-Ghazali has put down. He says, فَإِذَا فَعَلَ ذَلِكَ فَقَدْ أَدَّى وَاجِبَ الْوَقْتِ الَّذِي هُوَ فَرْضُ عَيْنٍ عَلَيْهِ. If he does that, he has completed that which is compulsory in that moment of time. فإن عاش إلى وقت الظهر فيتجدد عليه بدخول وقت الظهر تعلم الطهارة والصلاة. So now if this person who's reached puberty between Fajr and Dhuhr, and he's learnt the meaning of the kalimatain, the shahadatain, if he now reaches Dhuhr time, it is compulsory upon him to learn what? How to purify himself for salah and how to pray Dhuhr salah. And that's of course if he has not already done so. It becomes compulsory upon him to learn. Why? Because that's the wajibul waqt. That's the compulsory act which is obligatory upon him at the time. Then he says, وَهَكَذَا التَّدَرُّجُ فِي عِلْمِ سَائِرِ الْأَفْعَالِ الَّتِي هُوَ فَرْضُ عَيْنٍ. Likewise, the person will slowly acquire an understanding and knowledge which pertains to all of the other compulsory acts which are compulsory upon him as an individual. So let's say now that person lives until the time of Asr. What becomes compulsory upon him? To learn how to pray Asr if he hasn't already learned so. Likewise Maghrib, likewise Isha. Let's say for example that person the following morning reaches Fajr time, he needs to learn Fajr if he has not already done so. And let's say he's going to the marketplace to trade. He then needs to learn the fiqh of trading. It becomes compulsory upon him. Why? Because he's going to be accountable for his actions in the trading place. How many of us today learn that which relates to our place of work? How many of us know the ahkam which relate to our place of working? That which relates directly to that which we're doing. And you can take from this what he's saying, that which is to be considered compulsory upon the individual is that which relates to his individual circumstance. If a person, for example, is blind, a person cannot see, is it compulsory upon that person to learn that which is prohibited to look at? No, not for his own self. Maybe if he has children, for example, then yes, so he can teach his children. If a person does not have the ability to hear, is it compulsory upon that person to learn about that which is prohibited to listen to? Would it be wise for me to take a book in Braille, for example, and try to teach that person the things that you should not listen to? No, it's a waste of their time. And there are things which are more worthy of their time to learn. So let's look at our ummah today. Look at the situation of our ummah and ask those questions. What state are we in? What's our circumstance like? What should we be learning? What is a waste of our time? And we will find many of the things that are being taught are a waste of time. The differences between this particular sect, that particular group, the differences between these people and those people, what happened in the 2nd or 3rd century of Islam, those things need to be known by individuals that are specializing in those things. As for the masses, they're irrelevant. They're not going to help us in any way. We need to learn that which is relevant to our situation, our circumstance. And in order to understand what we need to know, we need to understand what we're missing, what we require, and so on and so forth. Then he says, وأما التروك فيجب تعلم ذلك بحسب ما يتجدد من الحال وذلك يختلف بحال الشخص إذ لا يجب على الأبكم تعلم ما يحرم من الكلام ولا على الأعمى تعلم ما يحرم من النظر. So Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah, he gave the example, of course prior to me giving it, but he gave the example that I just mentioned for turuk, that which we have to abstain from. What does a person need to learn? A person needs to learn that which they are prohibited from in relation to their circumstance. So you would not teach the person who cannot speak that which is prohibited of speech. Why? Because they can't speak. You're teaching them something which does not relate to them. So we have to ask ourselves, in our society today, what do we need to learn? And we need to apply it. I'll give some homework, if you like. And of course, it's not going to be assessed, but for us to reflect upon, for everyone. What things are haram for us to engage in online, on social media? Think about it. When you're scrolling on your feeds, whether it's Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, whatever else there may be, when you're scrolling on these things, when you're looking at websites, when you're on YouTube, have the question in mind, which of these things would be considered haram for me to look at? And see how many things we are potentially engaged in that we shouldn't be engaged in. Why? Because they become the norms of society. Then he says, وَأَمَّا الْاِعْتِقَادَاتِ فَيَجِبُ عِلْمَهَا بِحَسَبِ الْخَوَاتِرِ. Now he's going to talk about theology. And this is something, what do we hear today? The first thing you have to teach someone, their aqeedah. And what do they mean by that? Teaching them in-depth, detailed matters which are unrelated to their particular circumstance. He says that these things are compulsory according to the person's thoughts. فإن خطر له شك في المعاني التي تدل عليها كلمة الشهادتين فيجب عليه تعلم ما يتوصل به إلى إزالة الشك. For example, if a person starts to have doubtful thoughts about something which relates to the shahadatain, La ilaha illallah Muhammadan Rasulullah, then he has to learn that which will lead to the removal of those doubts. Do we have to teach a person, someone enters into Islam, and we're teaching them about the in-depth differences of opinion in relation to the attributes and names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Is that something which is compulsory for a person to learn? It's not. What is compulsory upon a person to learn is that which relates to the society that he's in today. And we have to understand this and realize this. When we look at society today, what relates to theology, what relates to philosophy, what relates to Iman, that is potentially harmful for a person's Islam. Those are the things that we need to learn. Those are the things that we need to teach. Our children going to universities, being exposed to philosophies, concepts, ideas, ideologies, we need to teach them the Islamic perspective on those things. That's what we should be teaching. Not 3rd century, 4th century, 5th century disagreements, which are irrelevant and which have been disagreed upon for centuries upon centuries. Those differences are not going to go away until perhaps the end of time. They've been here. The best of ulama will not be able to settle these disputes. We're not going to settle them. So we should just put them aside, agree to disagree, and move on, and focus on that which we would all disagree with as Muslims, as believers. But what's happening is we're arguing about these theological differences that stem from the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th century of Islam, and we are not addressing the theological issues of our time, and we're losing our youth. We're losing ourselves. We're losing our ummah to these things. And a person does not need to come out and say, I have doubts about Islam, for us to consider that this person has problems with their Iman. Adopting certain ideas, adopting certain philosophies, adopting certain perceptions of life is a consequence of some of these issues that relate to theology. And we're not going to go into detail now, but it's something to think about. What relates to philosophy, theology, and so on and so forth today, that we need to learn, that we need to specialize in, so that we can formulate proper arguments and answers from the Islamic framework. Then he says, وهذا هو الحق في العلم الذي هو فرض عين ومعناه العلم بكيفية العمل الواجب فمن علم العلم الواجب ووقت وجوبه فقد علم العلم الذي هو فرض عين. So he says, this is the reality in that which relates to compulsory knowledge upon the individual. He says that in summary, in brief, it is knowledge which a person acquires, which allows him to know how to apply Islam according to his circumstance and in the time wherein it is compulsory. So the one who learns how to carry out the compulsory act in its time of wujub, when it's compulsory, then he has learnt the knowledge which is compulsory upon him to learn. He has acquired the knowledge which is compulsory upon him to acquire. So again, another short example. If a person is going to perform Hajj, prior to performing Hajj, what does he need to learn? How to perform Hajj. Is it compulsory upon him, or is it compulsory upon his tour guide? Upon him. If he goes to Mecca and he doesn't know how to perform Hajj, should he be blaming his tour guide for not teaching him? No, he should blame himself. Should the tour guide teach him? Yes, but that's a different discussion. But the point is, we have to learn what is compulsory upon us according to the circumstance that we find ourselves in. If we can understand our circumstance, we can understand what we need to learn. Then he goes on to بيان العلم الذي هو فرض كفاية, clarification of knowledge which is voluntary. It's praiseworthy, voluntary, but it's not compulsory. And we'll stop with that inshallah, as it will probably take more than 10 to 15 minutes to go through. وصلى اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين.